Hello again. My name is Michael Paul Hurd. I am the owner of Lineage Independent Publishing and author of my Lineage series of historical fiction novels. Welcome to another bonus episode not tied to a specific book in the series. Before I start with the actual episode, I need to inform you that as of the end of January 2025, the website listed on the intro and end graphics of episodes 1 through 3 will no longer exist. The hosting service that I had used for the past year was not upfront about the pricing that I had enjoyed when I set up the website. At renewal, they informed me that my initial contract was on a promotional pricing schedule and that the new rate, nearly 3 times higher than the original, was what the standard rate would have been without the promotion. For those of you who set up and maintain websites, it is a time consuming and sometimes tedious task. I decided that paying the increased rate for something that provided little return on the investment simply was not worth the expense. Instead, I have elected to live entirely on social media platforms where the rate of engagement has been significantly higher. In this bonus episode, I'm going to talk about my approach to the research that goes into the Lineage series. This podcast is recorded, but I still invite you to ask questions or make comments in the appropriate interface on Facebook, YouTube, Substack, or Blue Sky, and I will respond as soon as possible. My research started with nothing more than a loose family tree going back about 3 generations. It's quite a laundry list of sources. Using emails from our deceased son Adam, handwritten notes from one of my paternal great-grandmothers provided by a first cousin once removed who I have never met, and corroborated by other handwritten notes from a second cousin who I reconnected with after over 40 years, plus a printed family tree from my maternal line that was first compiled in the 1960s, I gradually expanded each of those branches using a well-known genealogical program, Ancestry. Much of the ancestry research process is automated. It will populate your tree with hints that you have to accept, reject, or put on hold. With some assistance from artificial intelligence, Ancestry assembles a wide range of information that could include census records, immigration documents, draft cards, birth, death, and marriage certificates, among other things. FamilySearch.org, maintained by the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, is another tool I have used, but only to dispute or corroborate my other findings. Because many of the hints on Ancestry are based on other people's evaluations, I generally wait until I have 2 separate and corroborating sources before accepting the hint as a fact. As a recreational genealogist, I use my findings as background information to inform each book's storyline based on a period or event in history. What Ancestry.com gives you in terms of volume, FamilySearch.org makes up for it in terms of complexity. Other documentation can be found in newspapers, in the ever-growing database maintained by newspapers.com. Their holdings, in some cases, go back at least a century. Even simple things like business advertisements can provide meaningful information. For example, newspaper clippings are where I determined that my maternal grandparents eloped, that my paternal biological grandfather had been married 4 times before he was 25, and that a second cousin, 3 times removed, wrote the first news story on the sinking of the Titanic from aboard the Carpathia, the ship that rescued the Titanic's survivors. There's even a story within a story there, how reporter Carlos Fayette Hurd got his articles off the Carpathia, and that he worked directly for Joseph Pulitzer, receiving a cash bonus and an extended vacation from Pulitzer before there was even a Pulitzer Prize. I also use military databases, especially Fold3.com. It holds information on military personnel who served in all of America's armed conflicts. It does take some time to get familiar with how the information is presented and what documentation you are looking at. And the older the information, the harder it is to understand. Oral histories are another source of good information. If you are lucky enough to have living older relatives, 2 or even 3 generations older than you, sit down with them to get them to talk about their life experiences and either record the session or take copious notes. I did that with my mother-in-law to fill in some gaps on that branch of the tree. Some of the things these older relatives share can be quite surprising. Inspiration and insight can come from very strange places. A movie just dropped on Netflix called In the Heart of the Sea, starring Chris Hemsworth, about the backstory for Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick. In the movie, the character named Henry Coffin perhaps has a tie to one line of my family who may have been involved in the initial purchase of nearby Martha's Vineyard from the Wampanoag tribe in the mid 1600s. Tristram Coffin, who lived from 1609 to 1681 and believed to be my 10th great grandfather, left England in 1642 just as civil war was beginning there, and 7 years before Charles I was executed in 1649, and 9 years before Charles II became a fugitive after the Battle of Worcester in 1651, which, by the way, is the central storyline in my upcoming 11th novel, Take the Long Way Home. Anyway, when I needed a break from writing, I'm still researching to see if that real-life Henry Coffin might be a distant relative. But given the fact that families in the 17th and 18th centuries were usually quite large and often duplicated the names of offspring who died young, it has become a daunting task, even for someone like me who thrives on these deep dives. Suppose, for example, that a man and his wife have 10 children, 7 of which live to adulthood. They, in turn, each have 10 children, 8 of which live to adulthood. By the time the 4th generation is filled out, with even as few as 5 children per family unit, the family tree is now populated with over 300 individuals and their spouses, plus the spouses' ancestral lines that add even more complexity to the tree. Is there a mathematician in the house? Regardless of the familial facts I uncover in my research, the stories I craft have to be historically accurate on a thematic level. As part of my writing process, I research how people interacted with one another, how they spoke and dressed, and made sure that any words, technology, or weaponry in the story are accurate for the period I am writing about. I had one book, I think it was Uncertain Alliances, where I introduced a weapon that was barely an invention at the time of the story and did not come into common use until over 50 years after the story ended. I had to go back and correct every reference to that weapon. It was frustrating, a nuisance, and almost made me give up on that book and start over. Another example of complicated research is the flight of Charles II out of England following the Battle of Worcester in 1651. His route covered several hundred miles, and the oral account Charles provided to Samuel Pepys after the monarchy was restored in 1660, 9 years later, was as much bluster, bravado, embellishment, and self-aggrandizement as it was fact. I hope the past few minutes have given you some insight on the work a historical fiction author puts into their craft. I take pride in both the thoroughness of my research and the historical accuracy of the storyline. That's it for this bonus edition on my Lineage series of historical fiction novels. For Lineage Independent Publishing, I'm Michael Paul Hurd. Thanks for watching.